Hello everybody, Laszlo here. Welcome to another one of my mini game series in Game Maker Studio 2. This time we'll be building Pong, based on the original game that came out in 1972. For anybody who does not know what that game is, I've got it up on YouTube here. Just found a quick clip of it. If you watch this just for a second, we can see that there's it's a very basic game. You got two paddles, you got some scorekeeping going on, you got a ball bouncing between the two paddles, and that is the whole game. Now the game that we'll be building will be a bit more complicated than that. I do want to make it a bit more interesting, which means I want to be able to have a one-player or two-player version of the game. And I also want to be able to, in the one-player version, I want to be able to play against artificial intelligence. So here's our version. I'm just going to give you a quick look at it. We've got a one-player version. We've got our paddles, ball bouncing. You can see the player on the left-hand side, that's the AI player. He follows the ball perfectly. And the player on the right-hand side, that's me. And then we got some scorekeeping and so on. And in my game, I also want to be able to add let's see if I can get to it quickly, a winner screen. So whoever wins the game will be applauded at the very end. So here we go. Player 2 wins, press enter. Perfect. So that's the game we'll be building. Let's just go back to the thing here. So let's go over some of the game logic and how we're going to achieve this and all the different components of our game, as that is the best way to start any kind of project, is to have a plan laid out, know all the components, and then go into coding, because otherwise you're going to be guessing at what you need to do next. So let's get started. Here's my whiteboard, blackboard. Perfect. So we are building Pong. This is once again not an artist version. That's my kind of games that I build. It means the art is very simple. It's usually colors are black and white, with white outlines and black insides for all the shapes. So for our game, we have kind of like 4 big states of the game. We've got the menu, we've got single player, we've got 2-player, and then we have a game end. Game end screen is like who won the game. So these are our 4 screens. I do want to kind of break down each one into its objects that we're going to need in each one. So in the main menu, we're going to need a logo. This is not an object. I know right away that it's going to be just art. So let's make a quick note of that. The reason I know that it's art is because it doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. So in that sense, I don't need to make it an object. I can just use art. Or in Game Maker language, I can use a sprite to represent that. I will also need some buttons. These are the buttons that you click to select your level. So that's all the things we need for the main menu. For single player, we need to have a paddle on the right-hand side. This is the player. And we're going to need a paddle on the left-hand side, which is the AI. AI stands for artificial intelligence, for anybody who doesn't know. Computer player, same thing. Non-player character, also same thing. We've got a central dividing line, which is also art. It doesn't move, it's just there for decoration. And then of course we'll need a ball. We know that the ball will be bouncing around, so at least we know that much about the ball. And then we have finally, over in the 2 corners here, we've got our score. Okay, so this is the single player. 2-player, I'm just going to draw an arrow and say it's the same. It is the exact same. The only difference is on the left-hand side, we've got a player. So this player will be almost identical to player 1. They'll share all the same behaviors. It's just that one of them responds to W and S for the controls, and the other one responds to up and down arrows. So we only really need one new object for the 2-player game, which is the player 2 paddle. And then for the game end screen, which is the who won the game, we need just a display. So just in the middle, we're going to display who won the game. And this is a, I don't know what to call it yet. Let's just call it game over, sure. And the only thing that's going to do is when you click a key, it takes you back to the main menu. So that's all the different states that we can have for our game. Not states, all the different rooms we're going to need for our game. I want to go on to the next screen. I want to kind of talk about the logic for each one of these, or at least the ones that do things. So in this case, let's start with the buttons. So the buttons, what are we going to need to make these buttons work? Well, they need sprites. They'll both need their own sprites. We need a sprite for player 1 or 2-player game and for 1-player game. So that's 2 sprites. Let's just make a little note here. 2 of them. And then each one of these sprites, what I like to do with buttons, like especially for like menus, even though these are very simple games, they're not very artistic, I do like to give some feedback to the player so that they know what button they currently have selected. So to be able to achieve that, we need to create sprites with multiple images in them. So in this case, we'll need 2 images per sprite. Don't confuse these two. So like this 2 here is talking about that we need 2 sprites altogether, one for player 1, one for player 2, or sorry, one for 2-player game, one for 1-player game. And then these 2 images here are talking about a focused image and an unfocused image. So one is highlighted with the button selected, the other one's the button is not selected. And the way I'm going to represent that is focused is white and unfocused is gray. Okay, so that's the 2 sprites. They'll represent the buttons. The buttons themselves, for behavior, we're going to be responding to a left and right clicks. So the way you select the buttons is you click left or right. So if you click left, you move your selection to the left button. If you click right, then it moves to the right button. So somehow clicking the buttons, we'll have to set our focus. And once the focus is set, clicking enter on the keyboard should take us to 1-player or 2-player room. So the buttons themselves will be very similar. The only difference will be is when I click left, the 1-player button will get highlighted. When I click right, the 2-player button will get highlighted. And when I click enter, depending on which button I currently have highlighted, that's the button that's going to react to the enter key and take me to their respective rooms. So that's the buttons. Fairly straightforward. For the next ones, we have the paddles. So the paddles will have one very simple sprite. Let's just draw it. So that's the sprite I'm using. We do want the sprite to be centered. Or another way you can call it is anchor. I want the anchor to be in the middle because when I do the logic for checking if I'm at the edge of the screen at the top or at the bottom, I want to be using similar logic. I don't want to have to. This is for your guys' sake. It's just a way of being able to do the same check at the top and the bottom using something like the difference between the center and the edge of the sprites, which is like a sprite width or a sprite height divided by 2. And the other reason I also want it to be centered or anchored middle is so that when the artificial intelligence checks its position relative to the ball's position, it's checking the center of its paddle, not the edge of its paddle. That way it will get the center of the paddle to where the ball's going. So that's the sprite we'll need. For logic, the paddles don't have a lot of logic in them. They respond to up and down, as well as W and S, as well as AI. So all 3 of these can make the paddle move. So depending on what any of these events fire and they say, okay, time to move, the paddle is going to move up or down. Fairly straight logic in that. The one difference is that these 4, up, down, and W and S, we can set as specific events that trigger the move, whereas the AI is going to be something that's constantly moving. So this will be most likely in the step event, and it'll constantly tell the paddle to move. Other than that, the paddles don't have to do anything else. We're going to put the responsibility of bouncing not in the paddles, but into the ball. So let's move on to the ball next. The ball object has a few responsibilities. So let's start with the sprite. For the ball, we're going to just create a simple sprite, nothing to it. We're also going to center this as well. What else? So the ball has to bounce at the top and bottom. So I'm just going to draw 2 lines to represent the top and bottom of the room. Let's just label it. And then it has to bounce against paddles. So if you have a paddle, it also has to bounce. And the bouncing for this ball, like, this is such a simple game. There's no complicated angled bounce. It's just literally, if you hit the top or bottom, you reverse your vertical speed. And if you hit one of the paddles, you reverse your horizontal speed. Simple as that. It has to also go off screen. So the places where the ball can go off screen are your left and your right sides of the screen. So if it goes past the paddle, goes off screen, it has to trigger some events or some actions, and the actions that it's going to do are score ++. So either player 1 or player 2 score is going to increase by 1. It's going to destroy itself because at that point the ball is not really useful to us. It's off the screen. And then it has to trigger the game controller or do something with the game controller to tell it to spawn a new ball. So no, it's not spawning a new ball. It's restarts. I'll call it GC, game controller. So it restarts the game. Oh, you guys can't see that. Sorry. Let's just write it up here. So when the ball goes off screen, it's going to restart the game controller, which kind of tells it, start that countdown. And once the countdown's done, spawn the ball. Anything else? I don't think there's anything else for the ball. Let's move on. So we've covered the buttons, we've covered the paddles, we've covered the ball. And let's cover the game controller. So the game controller will have to do not a lot of things, just a couple. The main one, I think its main task is to spawn the ball. We know the ball randomly spawns in the middle of the screen somewhere, so that's going to be the job of the game controller, and that's going to be done by a counter. So we're going to build some kind of counter variable into the game controller. When that counter reaches 0, it's time to spawn the ball. It's simple as that. Another thing it'll have to do is watch the scores. So the reason it's watching scores is because but we don't want the game to go on forever. So we'll set like a maximum score limit, and then once that score limit is reached, the game controller is going to watch the scores, and when that's reached, it's going to take us to the game over screen. At that point, we know who the winner is. Does it do anything else? Spawn the ball, watch for scores. I don't think it does anything else. And then finally, I think we'll have one more object. No, let's go back. We'll have 2 more objects. We can put this on the same screen here. So we're going to have scorekeepers. Not scorekeepers, score display. These are the 2 top corners. They just display score. They do not do anything else. So these will be GUI events. So GUI events are the ones where you draw things, draw them on the screen. And then finally, we have one more object, which will be our game winner. this will display the winner. So this is the object that only shows up on the final, in the final scene, final room. Once it shows up, it displays who the winner is, and then when you click enter, it'll take you back to the menu. Fairly simple. So most of these objects are fairly simple. I think the most complicated ones will be the challenges for this project will be kind of keeping track of scores globally. We can't use the built-in score variable that's in GameMaker because we're no longer keeping track of only one player score, we're keeping track of two player scores. And we only have one score variable that's built in. So we have to create our own variables. I think they'll have to be global. And another thing that'll be difficult is keeping track of the flow of the game. Not super difficult, but it'll be one of those things where you have to have a game controller that spawns the ball. You have to have the ball trigger the game controller to spawn the ball, so it's kind of like a little back and forth. But other than that, I don't think this game will be very difficult to build. So let's jump right in and build this project. Thanks for watching.